Champaign County Agriculture Today with your host, Dennis Riggs.
Hello and welcome to Champaign County Agriculture Today. My name is Dennis Riggs. I'm so glad you tuned in today because we're going to teach you a little bit more about agriculture here in East Central Illinois and Champaign County. And that's why we're here, so try to let you know what's going on out there as far as the agriculture industry, because 3 times a day we all have something to gain from agriculture, and that's the 3 meals that we put on our table each day. Not only us here locally, but also consumers worldwide. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. You know, you see the corn and the soybeans and the wheat and the oats growing in the fields around, and you think, gosh, how can that ever make it from that field into my dinner table? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about where our commodities go here in East Central Illinois. On our program today, we've got 2 guys that are going to really help us out and talk to us about that on the corn and soybeans especially. We have Tim Lance here from the Illinois Corn Growers Association, Dean Campbell with the Illinois Soybean Association. Both gentlemen are farmers, so they're highly qualified not only in the production and where that commodity originally comes from, but also in their organizations. They talk about where it's going to go. So Tim, I'm going to start out with you today. Tell us a little bit about your farming operation. What kind of crops do you grow, and where are you located at?
Sure. I'm from Strasburg, small town in southeastern part of Shelby County, about 70 miles south of Champaign here. I grow corn, soybeans, wheat, have a beef cow herd, feed those calves out, so a little diversity. Just a family operation, pretty much myself. I have a retired father, retired father-in-law, have a fellow that helps me. But it's just us. Those family-sized farms have had to grow. You know, we're not just out in the yard, you know, feeding chickens and things like that. You know, like some of the population would like to believe.
Do you even have any chickens on your farm? No chickens at all, anyway. Okay.
But do have some livestock, and so want the public to know that we are still just family. You know, if they see big equipment or big trucks, that's what it takes to survive, as everybody in their jobs have to do more with less, so have we. So
you had an interesting name there for your part-time help. I believe you called both your father and your father-in-law as retired,
right?
But they're still working for you. Now, how do you talk them into that, Tim?
Well, old German farmers, they kind of like to. It's kind of hard not to.
So, it's got it in the blood, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, I'm glad you talked those retired guys out of retirement every once in a while. Dean, tell us about your operation. You're from the southern part of Illinois. Tell me about your farm.
Okay, I'm from Coulterville, Illinois, southwestern Illinois, about 50 miles southeast of St. Louis, halfway between St. Louis and Carbondale. The farm, the original part of the farm where our main shop has been in the family for over 150 years. It's been the family farm, as Tim was talking about. We're now doing roughly 2,000 acres. About 2/3 of that is rented land that we rent from other landowners in the area. And we're growing corn, beans, and wheat. Over the years, I grew up as a dairy farmer, sold the cows in 1992, and that was the first time in 130-some years that my family didn't milk a cow on that farm.
So changes happen, don't they?
Yes, and as Tim said, agriculture, especially the family farm type operation, has evolved over the years from the connotation that a number of people have that have been removed from farming, of all the livestock, the different the cows, the chickens, the swine operation. It has become more specialized, like all other industries in our country. And Tim and I are probably both concentrating. I am especially concentrating on field crops and have left the livestock sector. So that's kind of the evolution of the family farm type operation. Our operation, we just recently, I took on a partner as I'm viewing for retirement in a few years. This individual is Nathan, my new partner, is wanting to get started farming. He's a young man in his mid-20s, and so he's not part of my family. but he's part of the farming family.
And isn't that interesting how the farming tradition continues, whether it is family or in some cases non-family, still that desire to farm is very integral to the part of continuing the operation. The other thing that hasn't changed over the years is that farmers grow food. I mean, that's just kind of the way it all started. We go back as long as there have been people on this planet. That's a very important part of the operation. It's just now that we grow food. We grow livestock food, we grow human food, we're also growing energy, we're growing fiber, we're growing medicine. It has begun to evolve into those areas, and we're going to talk about that here on our program today. Let's talk about the uses of the food. We're going to start out here with the fact that not only do we grow food for our local matter of fact, when the United States started, the farmers around a town would grow the food and take it to their own families and then also into town. But now things have gotten bigger than that. Our first slide we're going to show today, slide number 4, is talking about ag exports. And this is something that agriculture can use as a long, strong talking point. And if you take a look at those numbers, we're not going to analyze this, we're not going to add them up directly, but I'm seeing millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars that are Illinois agricultural exports. Tim, why is it important that we export some of our product?
Well, because kind of like, as you said, when it first started, when the people around the town would, export it to, or not export it, but they would take it into town.
Well, I guess a wagon going up 2 miles would be export.
So we're actually doing the same thing. We have, a competitive advantage to some places in the world to grow corn or to grow soybeans. So it's best for us to use our resources to do that and export, our products to other countries. So, and especially where Illinois sits, we have a good river system, we have a good rail system, and that lends itself to us being able to export a lot of our products. In corn's case, about 50% of corn is fed to livestock. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the uses of it, whether it's in this country or other countries. So Illinois isn't as heavily livestock populated as it used to be. So we need to move that corn. Maybe it's just somewhere else in the United States. Maybe it's to some other country. But that's why it's important. We cannot. I guess, especially here in Champaign County, you have been blessed with so many soils that are so productive that, you cannot consume the grain that
we can grow more than we actually use.
Of course, so we have to export it. And it's good, it's good, it feeds the world. And, now, it also helps fuel the world, helps clothe the world. So yes.
Well, there's some great numbers out there. I don't have them on the top of my head. Maybe you guys do. That farmers used to feed themselves and maybe 5 other people,
sure.
And then it went to 12, and now we're up into the 150 area,
ballpark,
where
yes.
one farmer, you Dean, you Tim, grow enough food on your farm to grow for yourself, for your family, and those others. Well, what are some of those products? And Tim, I know you kind of specialize in the corn products.
Sure.
Our next slide
Okay.
we're going to show here, our slide number 5, is going to talk about some
Sure.
of the products that your commodity that you represent grows. Let's look at that list.
Sure.
A lot of things on that list, Tim. Kind of
Sure.
run down that for me.
Sure. It starts out with corn-based foods. That probably is where the consumer has the most contact with corn. Actually, uses probably less than 1% or around 1% of our crop. But that would be, corn chips, of course, cereals. You get into the different starches. You do get into sweeteners, which there has been some unfavorable things on sweeteners. But sweeteners actually only use about 3% of the corn market. So that's a pretty small portion. Ethanol is, we think is a positive development. That uses about a quarter of our crop. So yeah, the corn-based products are ever expanding. We still, though, do half of our crop still gets fed to livestock.
That's still the big one.
Exactly.
No matter if you go into and I know we had crayons and
Sure.
moisturizing cream. There's all kind of incinerary products
Exactly.
that come from corn, but
Exactly.
still feeding livestock
Exactly.
is the big one.
And one thing that's important on those, a lot of those, crayons, lotions, a lot of it's replacing our petroleum products, or maybe synthesized chemicals or something. So we can use a natural product, a renewable product, to fill a lot of these consumer needs.
Our watchers today may also be very familiar with the fuel side
Sure.
of this equation. I know this is our chance to ask a real live farmer about the corn fuels. We
Sure.
see the 10% ethanol
Sure.
at a lot of our filling stations around in Illinois, and we're also seeing the 85%
Sure.
ethanol. Is that a big part of the corn pie as far as the usage?
Sure.
And how important is it?
Sure. It's about right now. It's about 25 to 30% of the U.S. corn crop. So yes, that's an ever expanding market. We have Corn Growers Association has continued to try to open doors politically and just by education with that. Ethanol is, a renewable resource. It does, despite what some people would lead you to believe, it's very energy positive. Say for every gallon of oil, you would get the equivalent of like 1.6 back. Some people have led us to believe that's not true. It's using less water all the time. I know there was a ethanol plant proposed for northern Champaign, and some people had some trouble with water. The water usage is coming down yearly. It takes about 2.5 gallons of water to produce a gallon of ethanol, as opposed to 92 gallons to refine a gallon of gas.
See, that's a point.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's something we don't hear very often, that
Exactly.
it takes water to make petroleum fuel,
Exactly.
and it takes less water to make ethanol fuel.
Exactly.
Thanks for bringing that number
Sure.
up. What about then also in that whole area is the replacement of dollars?
Sure, exactly.
The dollars that stay right here in the U.S. rather than going overseas.
You're right, exactly, and it just has a multiple effect. I saw a study that since some people said, ethanol's been subsidized, or all these renewable fuels have to be subsidized. They were in their infancy. They were in infancy, an industry, but the return on investment. This is just to the government, to their revenues through more jobs through taxes is about 5 to 1 on what they have spent. Maybe giving the tax incentives or something for people to use, or they give the tax incentive to blenders that blend it. Things like that. The return in jobs, revenue, tax revenue back to the government has been 5 to 1. So that's a pretty good investment.
If it wasn't a win-win situation, I doubt if it'd sustain itself very long.
Exactly.
All right, we're going to switch over to Dean here for just a second, and we're going to give you a chance to talk about some of those products. Our next slide that we're going to put up here, slide number 6, talks about, as we did with Tim, the soybean products. So let's take a look at this, and Dean, if you could run down those, what's some of the big points there?
Well, again, as pointed out with corn, the biggest consumption of soybeans is into the animal feed industry, producing protein in that form, and that we're broadening the gamut there, going to aquaculture. Fish food has become a very exciting avenue for some of the soy products. But beyond that animal feed side, we've got a lot of soy foods out there, developed out soy milk. There's soy proteins, in utilizing those products can make some very nutritious snacks, that type of thing. Cookies using soy flour rather than replacing part of the wheat flour, very tasty and actually a higher protein item. Then you get into the oil side of it. The soybean, when its initial process, it takes the oil out of the bean and creates a high protein, roughly 48% protein, the meal, and then an oil, a very, very valuable vegetable oil comes out of the soybeans. That goes into a number of things: crayons, paints, foam for car seats. I believe there's a couple of auto manufacturers are using it exclusively in their car seats now. Plastics, and also goes into the biodiesel avenue, producing energy. There was we heard a lot of controversy about the food versus fuel situation. And the way I look at that is it's utilizing our excess products. We have a large portion of the oil from soybeans goes to food processing, to these other items, but then there was an excess. And the biodiesel industry is utilizing that excess oil It's not making, it's actually making the feed side of it, the protein side, less expensive to our consuming market, that being livestock or going in actually into human consumption, refining the meal more to make the soy proteins. So it's a food plus fuel. It's a win-win situation. It actually lowers the cost of food and generates fuel in the, quote, long run.
I've got a slide I want to show.
Okay.
We're going to go to slide number 1 here, which is maybe our folks that are watching here today can identify with these products a little bit better as we talk about them.
Right.
Domestic processed foods. We've got some cooking oil and some salad dressings. I'm kind of getting hungry just looking at it there. Dean and Tim both, I'll start with you, Dean. Of course, this is where a lot of soybean oil goes.
Right, a lot of soybean oil, and giving the corn credit, a lot of corn oil is a very good cooking oil. Food grade oils are derived from these plants. A lot of people drive down the road, I'm not going to eat soybeans, I'm not going to eat corn. They eat it every day in oils, in proteins, in meat, because that's the mainstay of our beef and our livestock. Not only that type, but then you do turn around and you see is on corn on the cob.
We're going to get. Are you ready for this?
Edamame is
right.
Edamame is a soybean that is harvested earlier than we normally think about it, and makes a very tasty vegetable type snack. It's there's a lot of different avenues to look at it. Different cultures use different portions of both of our products.
The soybean is probably not recognizable by most consumers as just as you guys harvest the crop and you have a handful of soybeans in your hand, because you don't really see too many people eating it right off right out of the field like that. Although it can be done. And
can be done.
As we all know, we've all done that to taste it, make sure the moisture's all right, that type of thing. But Tim, I'm going to switch over to you, and
Sure.
we're going to go to our next slide here, number 3, and people are going to look at this slide and say, "Oh yeah, I know what that is. That is corn."
Sure.
Right there it is. Now we're talking about human use. This is one such of those.
Sure.
Explain the difference between
Sure.
what we're looking at and other things that corn can be used for.
And that's a little bit of our problem on the food versus fuel debate. What you're seeing now is sweet corn. Totally different, it's still corn, still has a stalk, still has, ears. Totally different product than field corn or number 2 yellow corn that, that we are all producing. Sweet corn is probably less than 1%, of course, the total corn in the United States and in Illinois. So, that gets the lines kind of get blurred there. They say, oh gosh, you're taking that sweet corn out of my hand and putting it in my gas tank. No, that is grown like a vegetable, like green beans, or, with a lot more labor and a lot more care, a lot more expense. If we could sell our ears of corn for what you can sell those for, we would all be, very rich.
Doesn't work that way.
No, so it's a totally different, that's a specialty market. It's totally different, different animal.
Thank you for bringing that up and showing that, because as our consumers drive down the road, for the untrained eye, it's hard to see the difference between
Sure.
number 2 yellow corn growing in the fields that'll be
Sure.
used for livestock and the sweet corn. There's a little bit of a difference.
Sure.
Tell us how you would tell the difference. Maybe we can teach somebody.
Okay.
How would you tell the difference in your estimation, Tim?
Well, if they're generally, if they're in Champaign County here, they're going to see field corn. Sweet corn is what you're going to see, in people's gardens and things. It's going to be shorter. Ears going to be pretty low to the ground. If it's in a commercial situation, it's probably going to be irrigated, since it is such a high-valued crop. You wouldn't see many acres of it, because it wouldn't take many acres to, if there's 20,000 ears an acre, that's a lot of ears. So, 4 or 5 acres is a lot of ears to sell out of the back of their truck, or even to take to your local supermarket or the Walmart buys. If they buy a semi-load of sweet corn, 4 or 5 acres could have provided that.
There you go.
That
Well,
is-
thank you for bringing that up. I'm sure a lot of people, as they see the green fields of corn growing out there, think, well, that must be sweet corn, but it is different.
Sure.
We're going to go to our next slide here, Dean, and you talked about the importance of the livestock feeds. This next slide is going to kind of remind us of that. There we have all kinds of things going on there. We've got chickens, we've got cattle, and although we do have corn on the right-hand side, tell us about the livestock feed side and how important that is to Illinois producers.
Well, the as we alluded to earlier, a major portion of the crops grown here, the corn, the beans, even the wheat, goes to livestock feed. And that, the soybeans are the protein source, so in major part. With the meal coming out of 48% protein, a normal animal diet will range from 18 to 25% protein. So that, and there needs to be an energy source in there. Corn is a very good energy source, and so they marry together. Our crops work together that way to create a food source for animals to eat. And then from that animal production, we derive eggs, our chicken, our fried chicken, whatever type chicken it may be. We develop our pork products, pork chops, bacon, beef, all the beef cuts, milk. Those all come from the crops that we grow. So we're in essence growing a food crop. Probably 90% of our production is creating food of some type or another, a piece of the chain again, to put the chain all together, and then the kind of excess is going off to the fuel industry.
I don't know if you guys, I'm sure that in your organizations you encourage the consumer to pick up that jar of oil, of a salad dressing, or that cookie, the Keebler cookie, or the
Right.
corn chips, and flip it over and look at that list of ingredients.
Sure.
And Tim, what would you say is in that top, and they're listed as far as the importance
Sure.
and the percentage, what's usually in the top of those?
Well, some sort of grain generally, or
Right.
some sort. We have to realize, though, that even though it is the top, it might be 2 cents worth, 2 cents worth of corn or 2 cents worth of soybeans. So, last year when we had the Groceries Manufacturers Association, some other oil companies, some others were putting together kind of a smear campaign against renewable fuels. You kind of have to remember that if there were 2 cents of corn, worth of corn in the cornflakes box, and corn doubled, which it did for a short time. Now, of course, after a couple months, it's back to where cost of production or below, that your cornflakes box should have only gone up 2 cents. Well, food manufacturers kind of use that example maybe to raise prices, and as we know, when grain prices come back, they don't. So, you kind of, yes, we are producing food. I think 19% of the food dollar is actually for the raw commodities. 81% is for transportation, packaging, advertisement. So we have to remember, I think $1 increase in gas raises food prices, twice as much as $1, a dollar increase in corn.
In the raw commodity.
Yeah,
Right.
so we have to keep that in perspective, that we still are getting a very small percentage of the actual, consumers' food dollar.
And we like to point that out. We like to let our consumers know that even though it's the most basic and it's the beginning of the food chain, still as far as dollars invested, and I think your point is well taken, that many times the cost of the bag of corn chips is more expensive than the corn that's inside those corn chips. So.
On the marketing side, a point that I'd like to point out is agriculture is probably the only industry that I can think of that we pay the price that we have to buy our consumables, our fuel, our equipment. We pay the price that people ask of us, and then in turn we have to produce our product in a manner that we can generate the economies so that we can sell it in a market that tells us what we're going to sell it for. We are not able to set either our input cost or our sales price, and we have to work in that very narrow window that is very unpredictable as to what our margin is going to be. Unlike for example, an automaker can say, okay, the price of my raw material, my steel to put into that car went up, so now I raise the price of the car I'm selling. We cannot do that. And that's, in the fact that we can stay in business and produce food and feed the world, and yet we're still working with supply and demand on both sides. still amazing that we can keep going.
Dean, you capsulized right there I'm sure you guys have heard the wise old farmer in your area say we're the only industry that buys at retail and sells at wholesale. And that's it makes it a tough situation. But we keep on doing it, and we do a doggone good job of it too.
Yeah.
Are the acres of soybeans increasing, stay the same, or I'm going to ask on corn also, where are we at on soybeans as far as acreage and production?
We're probably staying relatively stable. It's a market that you can't fluctuate it a lot. You can't start and stop the machine, so to speak, as easily as you can in other industries. So it's a continuing momentum, and it has to keep rolling. So I don't see a lot of change. A lot of it's based on the economics of our own operations. In my part of the state, it's about an equal opportunity to make money from corn, from beans, from a wheat and beans, combination. Those crops, our net off of those is relatively the same. You get into other portions of the state and you can produce more bushels of corn per acre than what we can, and about the same bushel of beans. So it becomes it becomes loaded a little more on the corn acres because there's more profitability in that type of operation. So it's more where the individual can make money, but typically they stay in a pretty good balance.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tim, I was concerned that maybe Dean was taking over all the acres to grow soybeans. How about corn acres? Are we seeing that on operations about the same?
Sure, and I think, nationwide, we're between 80 million and 90 million acres of corn planted, and then beans kind of fluctuate, back and forth, maybe 10% a year back and forth. Right. There's been some concern that, especially with renewable fuels, you're going to tear up the pastures, you're going to tear down. That's not happening. I think we planted 97 million acres of corn in 1937. Yeah. So, yeah. With far less environmentally sensitive. They were just plowing and the wind was blowing and the water was washing. Where now we're conserving the soil. We're actually probably have fewer acres and crops the growth in the population and the growth in the fuel market is going to come from our increase in yields. It's not going to come from tearing pasture land up. It's going to come in from increase in yields and us doing a better job. Technology delivering us better yields.
Yeah. There we go. Well, we've got two of the best right here, two good farmers that have shared their insight as far as the corn and the soybean sides. Tim and Dean, thank you very much for sharing that with us. And what we want to leave our viewers with today is the fact that the whole food process is in good hands, whether it passes on from the family operation to others in your area to make the corn production work out perfect. That's what we want to do. We're going to raise this food for the hungry world. And folks, we thank you for listening today. We appreciate your interest in agriculture and the ability to learn about what we're doing. Hope you'll tune in again next time when once again we have a chance to tell you what's going on Champaign County Agriculture Today. I'm your host, Dennis Riggs. Thanks so much for listening.
Champaign County Agriculture Today is brought to you by Champaign County Farm Bureau.